now have nuclear DNA profiles on all 5 of the questioned hairs. And with regard to the hair found on Maureen Brainard-Barnes on that belt buckle, it was 7.9 trillion times more likely to have come from someone with the identical genetic profile as Asa Ellerup.
Well, the DA says Rex Heuermann is good for 4, the Gilgo Four. So my question is it true that the Gilgo Beach serial murder case is hanging by a thread? A single strand of hair maybe is the better word. Well, let's catch up on the new charges Rex Heuermann is facing in this long unsolved serial murder case. Will 4 victims be the final number? Well, hey, everybody, welcome to Profiling Evil. It's really fun to be live with you. Thank you for all the advice. Get a cough drop. I can't believe I left that dang thing microphone on, but I did grab a Ricola. I wish I was a sponsor of them. And it is so great to see you all here. Thank you so much. Thanks to my buddy Duty Ron and Ed Wallace. I jumped on at the last minute just to say hello, and a lot of you have come over from that show, so thank you so much for coming over. We're going to talk a little bit about Rex Heuermann being charged with the 4th homicide, rounding out the Gilgo Four. But I'm going to take things a little differently. I'm going to have some pieces that are recorded. I spent some time on Court TV today and did some reaction on the case, and so I recorded some of it while I was still in a tie. And we're going to talk. And frankly, I wanted to just sorry about that. I wanted to see what your questions are as they're rolling in, and we'll just talk and see if we can answer some questions. So hello to everybody. Thanks so much to the mods for jumping in and taking care of things while we're here. It was so freezing cold when I left this morning. I got down to where it's a little warmer and the air is a little cleaner. I've had a cold for a couple of weeks, as some of you have noted, and so I just had to get away. Again, thanks Ron and Ed. It was fun to be on duty, Ron. Earlier in the day, I also jumped on Surviving the Survivor with Joel, joined Sarge Joe, and we had a chat about Heuermann, as one might guess, talked a little more about that. D. Turner says, Rex Heuermann owns property here, and we had a 22-year-old boy disappear about a decade ago. I know Rex likes girls, but the proximity is pretty darn spooky. D, I think that's kind of interesting, because part of the question that I have, and maybe some of you have, is rarely do we see a serial killer really stop before they're arrested. They continue to hunt for victims, but there are some things that change that. We'll see that change as an offender starts to get older. They perhaps find themselves being less successful in trying to control victims, and that oftentimes is really upsetting to them, and they sometimes will make that change. I'm going to switch over my mic. For some reason, things are kind of changing, so please forgive the mic changes. Hopefully this is better. But it's really interesting as they go through this evolution, much like all of us, and that's really kind of an interesting concept that sometimes we have a hard time wrapping our minds around, is that when offenders commit these kinds of crimes, they're in pursuit of legitimate kinds of needs, like each of us have, a need for relationship, or a need for a feeling of success in our lives, or whatever that legitimate kind of a need is. The difference is an offender, because they're evil, will go about these legitimate pursuits in very illegitimate ways. And that is what creates what Leslie would say is these sickos. So thanks, Hope Hart. Yeah, it was fun to be on there today and to chat a little bit. And we'll we'll kind of jump into this. Again, I think I may have said this, but I want to just thank our mods for taking care of things and remind you of a couple of things that are coming up. Tomorrow night, at the same time, I'm going to go live again, and I'm going to put out a video on why women love true crime so much more than men. And I've pulled in a bunch of experts to help me on this. We'll have Dr. Doss from England. We'll have Dr. Johnston here. And then I have a couple of our family members from Profiling Evil's channel membership who also are sharing some of their content. So that'll be fun. One of which just jumped on, Jojo Wynn, which probably is trying to figure out what time of day it is down under there. But anyway, Mandy Schwab says, hey, why are there so many serial killers in America? Mandy, tell me what country you're from, and I'll help you remember how many serial killers you might have in that country. But yeah, we have a batch, and it seems like we're getting more, and I don't know if it's because we're better at reporting them or there really are more. Fofa, welcome aboard. I don't know if that's Fofa Cat with a different name, but anyway, great to have you here. Thanks everyone for jumping on. I'm going to come in and out. We're going to chat. I'm going to watch the chat and see. Let's see, love not live. Not sure what that means, Wanda, but maybe you're saying you'd prefer if I just record them and come live. I don't know, but anyway, it's so good to have you here. And folks, thanks for coming in. There are so many familiar faces here. I really appreciate you coming in. So we're going to bounce in and out, and I'll watch for questions as we're going along, and we'll just have a discussion tonight. So thanks a lot. Make sure you're putting your comments down below. Make sure you're putting your questions. If you do a super chat, it gets seen a little easier. I don't control that. Just makes it easier. But I do have this blown up a little bit bigger so I can actually see things a little more easily. So D says, love not live, just a typo. Okay. So here we go. Well, the Long Island serial killer case has drug on for more than 13 years. But police finally brought this whole thing together. And many people are saying that the only piece of evidence they have is a single strand of hair. And it's all hanging on top of that. But wait, what about that pizza crust full of Rex Heuermann's saliva that links the hair to the victims? Maybe both of them independently could be questioned, but what are the chances of both corroborating each other? In my opinion, getting a pizza box in Midtown Manhattan was huge. But genetically tying it together with hair that was recovered from the victims is even bigger, if not better. So now the Heuermann defense team certainly is out there saying they don't agree with what the prosecutor is cooking up. Let's listen to their comments immediately following Rex Heuermann's hearing today, where a fourth victim was added to his murder list.
Morning, so I don't have much information on the newest count or counts, but I'm happy to answer questions with you folks if I can. We entered a not guilty plea this morning. He has maintained his innocence from day one. He entered a not guilty plea on the original indictment, and he again entered a not guilty plea this morning. Well, we had advance notice that it was coming, so I explained that to him. Again, he said, I'm not guilty of these charges. He's looking forward to fight these charges, and we're doing that. We're going to continue to prepare. I expect that additional discovery will be forthcoming on the newest victim, and we're going to examine that and scrutinize it. You folks have followed this case from the beginning, and all along we have been told that the evidence is unsuitable for nuclear DNA testing. This morning was the first time, and this is 13 plus years, that miraculously nuclear DNA testing and results have come forward. There has been testimony, there has been lab reports that consistently said it was incapable of having nuclear DNA testing. And we had mitochondrial DNA, and those statistics were quite frankly not very convincing. But I am concerned because, again, from day one, and remember folks, This has been a 13-plus year investigation, and we have been told, and you folks have covered this, that there is no nuclear DNA available. And in fact, it's unsuitable for DNA testing on the nuclear level. We have been told it's mitochondrial testing, and there have been results. Those results are not very convincing.
Well, before I jump into that, I want to just talk to that point. The defense attorney is doing exactly what he needs to do. He's trying to create doubt in our minds. Why this is being tried in the public is really interesting to me, and I'm looking for your comments down below. But his job is to create doubt, and if he could create doubt in just a few jurors' minds, then maybe that is enough to sway them. Whether in the initial stages of this case they had enough to do a deeper dive into the nuclear, and did I catch Tierney say a nuclear rather than nuclear? I can't remember, but it reminded me of Homer Simpson. But anyway, that I'm going to talk a little bit, because I talk about it on court TV in a minute, but about the differences between mitochondrial and the nuclear DNA and the importance of this information. But again, keep in mind, they can evolve. Techniques can get better. They can find labs that can do things, but this thing's going to boil down to having experts sit on the stand and argue out whether it's believable or not that the evidence has reached the standard that they say it has. And I think, in fact, they'll be able to. DA Ray Tierney said that police had been watching Heuermann for months. Now, I think that's really important. They'd been watching this guy for months before they ever recovered that pizza box. That was the one that Tierney said, if you remember, pizza crust is like a sponge. It allowed the saliva to seep deep into the dough, and that's what's pulling this thing together. Now, the defense might not like these numbers, and I'm pretty convinced, based on the DA's comments today, that the hair coming from the belt buckle is now tied to Heuermann pretty dang strongly. In fact, the defense said it was 7.9 trillion times more likely to come from Heuermann's wife than anybody else on the planet. Holy cow, I need my back office. It was the prosecution that actually said, hey, it was 7.9 trillion. And we're going to talk about those numbers in a minute. But I wanted to shout out Jen Westenhoff-Lease. If you remember my videos and appearances on Dr. Phil with Jen and her mom and sister and brother, her dad is Detective Dennis Westenhoff, who was brutally murdered 33 years ago, Jen, on Valentine's Day. And I keep thinking, Tierney, solve and charge Dennis's killer. But hasn't happened yet. We're going to continue to fight for that. And if you get a chance, make sure you go over to the Dennis Westenhoff site on Facebook and give that family some support. So, Reese, why did this new charge take so long to happen? I think they had to get the stuff through processing, and getting forensic DNA tested is an incredibly long process, sometimes really slow in coming. And so I think, and I mentioned this on Duty Ron tonight with Ed and Ron, is that I believe that the DA would have preferred to have charged all four victims and charged Heuermann with 4 counts from the onset. But if you remember back when this thing happened, he actually mentioned that they were concerned about some of Heuermann's activities, whether that means he was selecting another victim and that they were trying to stop that from happening. I don't know, but nonetheless. Diane, great to see you. Thanks for all the support over all these many years. And gosh, I probably need to mute myself more often than less often. Who knows? But anyway, let's see what else we got going on here. What people are, and here's Jen shouting back, we're not giving up. Thanks for the shout out for justice for Dennis Westenhoff. And Jen, you ought to put in the chat box the link to the webpage so that we can continue to support you and your family, how much I love them all. So let's see, Leslie, YouTube member, congratulations. And thank you so much for joining up with us tonight. Sherry's coming in from Memphis. Good to see you, Sherry. And let's see. Here's something I might have missed earlier. Great idea for poll. Who all thinks the wife knew? Yeah, there. Okay, let's go for it, Holly. How many of you think the wife knew? I actually talked about that a little bit on Duty We're On tonight as well. So let's see. But let's jump back in one more time.
So we now have nuclear DNA profiles on all 5 of the questioned hairs, and with regard to the hair found on Maureen Brainard-Barnes on that belt buckle, it was 7.9 trillion times more likely to have come from someone with the identical genetic profile as Asa Ellerup.
Now, I don't even know how to make sense of numbers like this, except for to try to put it into more simple terms. So here's my attempt. 1 trillion equals 1,000 billions, or 1,000,000 millions. And to put this in even easier terms, it would take 32,000 years to finish 1 trillion seconds. That is a ton of evidence. Now, I just want to stop there for a second, too. 7.9 trillion chances that this would be anyone else but someone in the genealogy line of Heuermann's wife. That number, it would take 32 years of just 1 second marks to hit 1 trillion. So what's that, 150 years to get 8 trillion? I don't know. Kind of crazy when you think about it. These are huge numbers, and the introduction of these new numbers wasn't just the number of that one alone. They also increased the numbers on other victims, and they created a number that was so large on the male hair that was found, suggesting that it came from Rex Heuermann, that there's not even a number big enough for them to write that down and make sense of it. So, yeah, this thing is really starting to stack up against him. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the other evidence in addition to that. So, yeah, you're weighing in on whether you believe that Rex Heuermann's wife knew about what was going on, and people are expressing frustration over the GoFundMe and now the movie deals and all of that. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of interesting things come out of this one, but let's just continue on for a moment. Mounding, and keep in mind, police aren't saying out loud things like they were watching Heuermann for many, many months. But folks, you just don't do that without a whole bunch of suspicion. And I suspect more information, even more than came out in today's press conference, which was a ton of information, is going to come out in the days, weeks, and months to come.
Mike, the denial of bail application by the state, and man, the search of the home, it just revealed so many things, so many connections to these victims. I mean, what are your thoughts on and today the prosecutors really sang the praises of this. Apparently this mitochondrial DNA is not your daddy's DNA. It's a much better DNA. They call them paleogeneticists. And this is another level of DNA testing, which is almost unassailable, at least according to the prosecution. What do you know about it?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about DNA, Michael, you look at the mitochondrial DNA, and that's based on about 16,000 different base pairs to come up with that answer. When you go to nuclear, it is 3.3 billion DNA base pairs that are analyzed here. So when they come back with a figure that it would take one person out of 7.9 trillion, that's a phenomenal number. Then you get them answering about that male hair that was recovered, and that number is even bigger. In fact, the way Tierney describes it is it's so big there isn't really a number for it. And I tried to wrap my mind around this 1 trillion number alone just to kind of put it into perspective. And I came back with this answer after looking and really researching this. 1 trillion seconds would take us 32,000 years to get through those 1 trillion seconds. And so now you have 7.9 trillion in one chances that it was out of the same DNA strand as his wife. It's incredible.
It's devastating stuff. And if folks want to know, okay, well, they found the wife, they found the daughter's hair. Well, at least according to prosecutors, they've already figured out that the family was nowhere around when these things happened. So the connection really points to him.
So I'm glad I played that little clip because I clarify something that I may have said a minute ago. 320,000 years, if we do some math on this, I think. And I'm just swagging some numbers. But anyway, yeah, it's Mandy Schwab. Welcome. Became a YouTube member. And I think Mandy is from down under. So thank you. And let's see. Debbie says, New York, Mike. You're in New York also. Actually, I retired last month, but my office was on 100 Broadway, so just a few blocks from Rex Heuermann's office. And you may remember several times I would, at lunch, go out and shoot a video from sitting out in one of the little squares or parks. But yeah, I'm glad now. I actually drove on roads today where there wasn't a soul in sight for miles and miles. It was really awesome. And I've always lived in Utah, but my office has been either New York City or Washington, D.C. So anyway, great to be in Utah and drive down a road and not have 1,000 cars around me. But anyway, Honey Hush, thank you so much for subscribing. And gosh, really nice. And Eminem, thank you. Happy retirement. Yeah, I keep getting up at 5 in the morning. I go sit at my desk and realize that nobody cares. So anyway, it's kind of a new experience. Let's jump back into this. One great trial to watch. And at the end of this video, I'm going to play the DA's comments today after this fourth charge was filed. It appears that the DA team has now tied Heuermann to the 4 bodies found along Long Island in 2010. Now, there's a lot of other bodies, 6 more at least, and I suspect this is more of a serial location than a serial murder case, including those other 6. So make sure you're checking out my story map that I created on the Long Island serial killer case. You can find it at profilingevil.com. And while you're there, make sure you're signing up for our digital newsletter, the BOLO. BOLO stands for Be on the Lookout. And I think you'd really enjoy the BOLO. But check out that story map. It gives you everything that's gone on out there. Now, the newest charge, the one today, is for the murder of Maureen Brainard-Barnes. And it comes after a grand jury probe into the case and the state's evidence that we just talked about. This 60-year-old Rex Heuermann is already accused of murdering Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. Now, the 4th of the Gilgo Four is piled on top of him. For his part, Heuermann has pleaded not guilty to the slayings, and I suspect nothing's going to change with the 4th charge. He remains locked up without bail, and his defense is going to continue to work forward. Remember what they said? They're looking forward to their day in court. So go back, watch some of my earlier videos on this case, and make sure you watch the press conference at the end of the video to get all the details, which get pretty detailed. But for now, I want to remind you of the different crime scenes in this kind of a complex case. So let's just talk about those crime scenes. There are generally several. You know, I want to stop there for a minute because I had a pretty interesting experience. I actually shared it on Duty Ron. So for those that are listening to me ramble on with old stuff, please forgive me. But I was heading down here today. I left. It was about 11 degrees outside, and I stopped in central Utah in a place called Millard County, a place called Fillmore, actually about 10 miles north of Fillmore. And it was the location of a burial site where a serial killer case that I was had a chance to work on, where the body was recovered, and it was a very vicious serial killer. And I remember we were actually doing some training on profiling, and the investigator brought the photographs in and said, "Hey, I got this unsolved case. Would you look at it and give us your thoughts?" And Greg Cooper and I were in this area training. And as we started thumbing through the pictures, the victim in where I had stopped, the victim in this particular case was out in the middle of nowhere, posed. Her hair had been braided and pulled over her left shoulder. And then she was shot multiple times with a small caliber weapon. And for some reason, my camera keeps popping on and off, so forgive me. But as I looked at the photographs, I recognized the signatures of the serial killer who was responsible. And I said, I'll bet that Robert Ben Rhodes killed this woman. And anyway, we ended up watching that detective put together an incredibly good case. Robert Ben Rhodes had killed this victim at the grave that I was standing at. Her husband in Texas kept her and assaulted her over a number of days before executing her there. And anyway, as I was sitting there, I thought it would be really important to talk about the crime scenes and the different kinds of crime scenes that happen in these kinds of cases, because we keep talking about these serial predators and where they hunt, but we don't talk enough about where they dump their bodies. And to me, that tells us an awful lot about the offender. So I'm going to be talking about that now for a little bit. Scenes in a major case like this. The first that we often talk about in these kind of perplexing serial crimes is the initial contact site. Now, this is the place where the predator and the victim come together. In this case, that first initial contact site was probably that online site where there was postings back and forth for an escort service. Now, it might have also happened out on the streets of New York City. My office used to be just a few blocks from Heuermann's office. I know the area really well. So it could have happened along the street, out where escorts are seen, or it could have occurred in one of the bars around the area. But the thing that's important is that it was following him in Midtown Manhattan that led to that pizza box. Now, again, we have to consider these first initial contact sites can occur in a lot of places, but here's the thing that's really important. It's that the victim and the predator come together in space and time. Now, so I want to just stop there for a minute, see if any of you have any questions, because really this is such an important investigative principle in the overall realm of profiling and criminal investigative analysis, that initial contact site. So I want to just say it again, and I apologize if it's too repetitive, but the initial contact site is the place and time when the victim and the predator come together. And the victim doesn't necessarily have to know that that happened, but the predator has to know and then start to focus on the victim. And this can be in a number of places. So that serial killer case I was talking about and the grave I was standing at this morning, his preferential place to identify victims was in truck stops. And he would look for women who were working in the sex trade industry or other things at the truck stops. Yeah, often referred to them in a disgusting way as lot lizards. And he would then take them into his vehicle. But that created risk because people saw him interacting with them, and then the women disappearing. So then he started looking for opportunistic victims, somebody that was broken down alongside the road or someone that he was following. And there were actually photographs recovered that he had taken with his Polaroid camera from inside the cab of his truck, looking out the window down into the cars at girls that I assume he was targeting and at least fantasizing about. But the initial contact site is incredibly important. So in the case of Rex Heuermann, we have to consider that, number one, we know that there were online portals where he was getting escorts and other kinds of contact that he was working from. So we know that that was one of those initial contact sites. So that tells us a place that we can investigate. We can safely assume, as I mentioned, walking in that area and knowing where some of those victims disappeared from in Midtown, is that they might have been out on a street or someplace where he identified them. But I don't know if they are actually out like the old days where you would see sex trade workers standing out on a street waiting for someone to pull over. And then, of course, there always are places where they might go to pick up people, like a bar or other kinds of locations like that. So the initial contact site is incredibly important because it also tells us behaviorally more about the predator. Why are they comfortable in that location? And frankly, why is the victim comfortable in that location if, in fact, they choose to go there rather than they're compelled, like someone who breaks down in a vehicle? I hope that's helpful. Let me just see what you're commenting here. So Beth is saying, so cases can have two initial sites. The first is online. Actually, that's a really good question, because while there are three basic crime scenes, the first being the initial contact site, that's a crime scene. Those crime scenes could be multiple in nature, but there's always going to be only one initial contact. That's the first time they come together. Now, they might come together later, and you can, I guess, theorize that that was the initial contact site for that particular criminal spree, but that is where it really becomes kind of interesting. Let's see. Fofa is mentioning, yeah, go back, go to my playlist and to the Academy and look up the victim risk continuum. I think it's probably one of the best videos I've done from an instructional perspective on how we can personally reduce our own level of risk. And I would recommend it for any loved one that you have, that you deal with. A lot of mention about Craigslist in the Heuermann case. And so, yeah, and this comment that some in the sex trade industry do it to pay their bills. The question or the issue is really they accept the level of risk in order to accomplish other kinds of things and fulfill other kinds of needs. And boy, I'm not going to judge that one way or another. But anyway, let's move on to the next one. Heuermann was communicating with potential victims with burner phones, and even more of that evidence came out today. It came out by way of Tierney saying it happened. But keep in mind, too, that the Heuermann's captured on CCTV purchasing additional minutes on one of those burner phones just before his arrest. Now, it's important to also note that the initial contact site may only again be known to the predator. In other words, the victim may not have even known who the assailant was in many of these cases. But I think we can rest assured that the predator knew them. And in this particular case, the victims, it appears, had made contact with him digitally and set up a time to get together, even including having some relationships in the past through that escort service. Heuermann also gets identified by witnesses. In fact, a boyfriend, a pimp, who reported a vehicle like Heuermann's in one of those escort cases before the victim disappeared. Now, the next crime scene that I want to talk about, we've talked about the initial contact site, is the actual crime scene or the place in which the assault or the murder occurs. Now, it's really unknown to us where the 4 victims might have actually been killed. But some of the evidence we're seeing would suggest that Heuermann's home is certainly not out of the running for the location of the actual crime scenes. But there could be several actual crime scenes if this thing happened over a series of time, individually or in the aggregate, since there are at least 4 victims in this case. So again, in some cases, there might be multiple crime scenes where the actual assaults and murders take place. Now, the final crime. So let's pause there for a moment and just see if there are any questions on the actual crime scene. And to reiterate that, the crime scene is the place in which the violation of a statute takes place, a sexual assault, a murder, a kidnapping. And so there could actually be multiple crime scenes in these cases. In this particular case, you could theorize that Heuermann may have, if in fact he's responsible for these things, committed an assault and possibly the homicide inside of his home. It's going to be interesting to see the evidence that rolls out and get a feel for what really comes out of what was recovered in that search and subsequent searches, because even as one of our viewers right now has indicated, apparently just a few days ago, the medical examiner was back at the Heuermann home. And I frankly missed that. But nonetheless, there could be multiple locations. They could have happened at the same place. It's possible he could have committed some kind of an assault or a kidnapping and taken them out to the place in which their bodies were recovered and committed a homicide there and then left the bodies there. We just don't know without the evidence that I'm sure the DA will hopefully be able to uncover. But keep in mind, initial contact site and then the crime scene. And the crime scene can be in multiple locations. And apparently there's some AI now that if you stick your thumb up, looks like, oh, maybe not, they pop up. Anyway, let's go on. What I want to talk about is going to be the disposal site, or the location in which the predator discards the victims in this case. And I hope we never forget who these victims are. In this case, the Gilgo Beach area happens to be the area. And you know what? It just happens to be south of Heuermann's residence. Now, the location in these kinds of cases is really important because it teaches us some investigative principles about the predator's level of organization and their experience level. If Heuermann is found guilty in this case, it could be argued that he was a meticulous, well-prepared predator, at least in the beginning. A predator who took time preparing the body for disposal, including picking that perfect spot where the body had a less chance of being discovered and a greater chance of him getting away with it. Seemed to work for many years. Now, what's going to really be interesting to me is the evolution that this predator, if it is Heuermann, went through as the murders continued. Did he go from organized to disorganized? And I'm going to be looking for answers as this court case unfolds about whether Heuermann became lazy and made mistakes along the way. Well, I hope looking at these 3 crime scenes helps each of you to kind of think through the criminal behavior in the Long Island serial case. Look at it a little more deeply than just kind of that surface level. There are so many things to consider beyond simply physical and digital forensics in these kinds of cases. Now, I want to stop there for a minute and just pull up a map that I created some time ago. It was from a video that I did, oh gosh, it's been actually quite some time ago. But I think that it might help you, if you're not familiar with the case, get a sense of some of the areas in here. So let me just make sure I can, okay, so if we were to kind of take a global view, we're talking this area of the northeast coast of the United States, and all of the victims have been located along Long Island here. And what I did in that story map, if you go into that, you'll be able to explore this a little on your own, is I've indicated places where victims disappeared, last known place, and places where their bodies were recovered. From there, we can go in and look at the individual victims. We can go out and look at Shannon Gilbert and the route that she took. And if you remember Shannon Gilbert and her attorney, who, boy, I'll tell you, he's an aggressive bounder, but he's kept the case alive. This is the route that Shannon Gilbert took on that night when she was banging on doors and saying that someone was trying to kill her. And then the location in which her body was recovered. And again, I put all this on a little 3D map to kind of make it a little easier to understand. Excuse me. I'm going to get past some of these because what's so interesting is that if we look at Heuermann's residence where he was arrested, we end up seeing, if I can turn this map around, it's kind of hard to tell from right here, but I'm going to zoom out a little now. We can see that this is where the bodies are being recovered, that he has a shot from his home to where those bodies are being recovered. And we can actually go in and start to follow his patterns and movements. So we can go from where he was arrested to the location and the routes. For instance, this part of the map shows every body that has been recovered in Long Island, and it all centers right here on Rex Heuermann's home. And so it shows the most probable route, but most importantly, something that I talked about on Court TV was that if Heuermann was trying to drop those bodies off and dispose of them, he could have actually left his home and made a, oops, let's see, let me go back here. I'm hitting lots of crazy buttons here. He could have actually driven in one complete circle and dropped bodies over time. And of course, if you've been out in that area late at night, there are times when there are not many vehicles out on the road. From there, just a couple more things to kind of talk about. Again, looking at those routes when everything's dark, you can kind of see the lighter colors, which is open water, and then the ocean here, and then Heuermann's house and the direction to get into each of those locations. And we can look at it in a number of ways, and this is where I sometimes geek out too much on maps, but it really makes things easier to understand from my perspective. So there are a number of routes that he could have taken in order to get to those locations and be able to dispose of those bodies, if in fact he's responsible for those. And frankly, we just don't know some of those answers. So let's see what kind of questions are coming in. Hopefully you like maps as much as I do. Let's see. Lila says it's refreshing to be in a chat that is mostly people who have a genuine interest, normal empathy, and consideration. I agree. And, you know, that's a great time to just thank you all for always being so dang good with each other and keeping things on a higher level. So thanks a lot for that, folks. Let's see. Wait a minute. A doe child. Oh, yeah. So there were the does. I think they've now been named, though. I'll let somebody else answer on that one. And this is interesting. I don't know if my map shows this, Debbie, but they could have taken the parkway or the bridge over to Gilgo. And I think that's that round that I talk about and the two different possible directions that he goes. Let's see here. Laura says that is one dark, desolate place. Simi likes maps. Thanks for that. And there we go. The Map King. So let's jump back in. You know, it's going to be really hard to overlook what may soon be revealed in the search warrant on Heuermann's home. I mean, I'm just waiting to hear what was below ground, what was discovered. Why did this guy have more than 280 firearms in his home? Why was his family completely in the dark about his secret life? Or were they? Well, what linkages will the prosecutor show with Heuermann's cell phone data? Because we saw a bunch come out today. And how is this guy's defense team going to minimize that same pimp who gave a tip about Heuermann and his vehicle, something that the DA called that turning point in the investigation? But if you remember, it wasn't just the vehicle that became so interesting in this. It was when the pimp described that he actually planned on robbing Heuermann, who was coming to see his girlfriend, until Heuermann walked up and the pimp realized he was a massive 6'6", 270-pound man. The pimp actually described him as someone who was the size of a mountain. And don't forget, there are other pieces of evidence that are stacking up in the case. Things like those bizarre internet searches by Heuermann that he was making over that 16-plus month period of time, including searching for the victims by name and searching the nickname that he had earned in the press, the Long Island serial killer. So what are your thoughts on this one, folks? I mean, do you think there's going to be more arrests than the 4 that we've seen? I'm going to be watching for your responses in the chat down below, and I hope that you'll take time to respond to each other. Make sure that you're taking the opportunity to really talk this through with your peers in the group here, and make sure you're sticking around for that press conference on the 4th arrest, Gilgo number 4. Hey, please visit profilingevil.com and sign up for the BOLO. BOLO stands for Be on the Lookout, and it's our digital newsletter. And the only way you're going to get it is if you sign up for it. Now, we just released the first issue for 2024. Keep in mind, I'm never going to share your email address, and we only ask for your name, no other information. You can even choose not to put your last name in. You'll find it on our website, where you'll also see a new design. So that way you can go to the website often and stay up to date. And remember, you can find Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course here on YouTube. And folks, if you like podcasts, I think you're going to really enjoy Profiling Evil's podcasts. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform. And by all means, don't forget about Profiling Evil's choir practice. It's back, folks, on the first Monday of every single month at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. In February, I'm going to have FBI profiler and author Mark Safarick on with me. And we're going to be joined by a California police officer who's assigned to working that infamous Skid Row region. He's going to teach us a little more about what choir practice means to police officers like him.
Hey everybody, look who I'm hanging out with. And listen, I'm not attending choir practice, but I just wanted to tell you that you need to be watching Profiling Evil YouTube. Don't miss it. I'm telling you, there's something there for you every single time. I never miss, you shouldn't either.
At the time of his arrest, the phone ending in 1697 was recovered from his office, and the phone 2671 was recovered from his person. With regard to the phone ending in 1697, again, we see the same repetitive activity on that phone. It was used to contact numerous sex workers. We also were able to use it to identify an alias, Andrew Roberts, which was a known alias being used by the defendant. We were also able to recover a fraudulent email account, which is sandbagger303@gmail.com. The Sandbagger email address was used similar to the T-Hawk fraudulent account. The T-Hawk was used after Sandbagger, but the Sandbagger account was used once again to search for torture porn and info on the Gilgo case, on the Gilgo investigation, and victims' families. The defendant was particularly interested in the cellular telephone technology being not only used by the FBI, but specifically by the FBI in this case. We also recovered numerous electronic devices from the defendant, including a number of laptops, smartphones, tablets. From that, we learned that the defendant undertook numerous searches for software that could assist in erasing or wiping data from computer and digital devices such as Easy Hide IP and Shredder X. He used those two applications to destroy evidence in this case. We see that he continued to make prostitution-related searches before, during, and after the disappearance and murder of the 4 victims in this case. Notably, on one laptop that was recovered from the house, there was an attempt to shred evidence shortly before the defendant met with and murdered Melissa Barthelemy. Another laptop recovered in the house accessed Amber Costello's back page ad on September 1st, 2010 at approximately 9:03 p.m., and that is just hours before the ruse occurred around midnight on September 2nd. So the way the timeline works is on 9:03, that laptop that was recovered from the defendant's house was used to access Amber Costello's back page ad. Thereafter, at about 11:33, the burner phone that was used to kill Amber Costello contacted Amber Costello's phone from Massapequa Park, and later at 12:05, that same phone accessed that Amber Costello's phone, but this time the phone had moved from the Massapequa Park area to the West Babylon area where Amber Costello lived, and then back to Massapequa Park. That is significant evidence as well. I think the biggest change is the DNA evidence, and we've received significant DNA evidence between the time of the first arraignment and this time, which I'll synopsize for you at this time. We've always spoken, right from the very beginning, we spoke about the 5 hairs of significance that were recovered from 3 of the 4 burial sites of the women. So I'll just go through that. We earlier reported on mitochondrial DNA evidence as to 3 of those hairs. We now have nuclear DNA results for all 5 of the hairs. So I'll go through it. The first, the most significant hair for the purposes of the superseding indictment was the hair that was found on Brainard-Barnes. It was found on the buckle of the belt that secured her lower body, and we also found three hairs at the site of Megan Waterman's burial. We found 2 female hairs and 1 male hair. The male hair was found at the bottom of the burlap that Megan Waterman was wrapped in, and the 2 female hairs were found around the head area, 1 at the top of the burlap and 1 near the tape that was used to restrain Megan Waterman's head. The 5th hair was a female hair that was found in the area of Amber Costello's head. Now, at the time of the original arraignment, we reported on mitochondrial DNA results for 3 of those hairs. With regard to the Megan Waterman hair that was found outside the head area, it was consistent with the genetic profile of both Asa, the mitochondrial DNA profile of both Asa and Victoria Heuermann, and you could exclude the rest of the population to 99.69% of the rest of the population. With regard to the 1 male hair of significance that was found on the burlap with Megan Waterman, again, that genetic result was consistent with the defendants, and 99.96% of the population could be excluded. And then finally, we had the mitochondrial results with regard to the female hair found at the Costello burial site, and that was consistent with the genetic profiles of both Asa and Victoria Heuermann, and that was to an exclusion of 99.98% of the rest of the population. And if you remember the science of mitochondrial DNA, unlike nuclear DNA, you inherit that solely from your mother. So a mother and a child will have identical mitochondrial DNA profiles. So that is the mitochondrial results. We now have nuclear DNA profiles on all 5 of the questioned hairs, and we use this using the SNP or SNP process. And with regard to the hair found on Maureen Brainard-Barnes on that belt buckle, it was 7.9 trillion times more likely to have come from someone with the identical genetic profile as Asa Ellerup. With regard to the first hair that we got the mitochondrial DNA profile on, the female hair on Megan Waterman, that is 2.374 times 10 to the 48th power as likely to have come from someone matching the genetic profile of Asa Ellerup. And the way that that number is expressed, that's scientific expression, I'm told. So that's basically 2.374, and you add 48 zeros to that. So that's a number so large it doesn't even exist. A name for it doesn't even exist. With regard to the second hair that was found on the tape by the head of Maureen, of Megan Waterman, that was also consistent with a person with the same genetic profile as Asa Ellerup, and that was 2.778 times 10 to the 488th power, could exclude the rest of the population. With regard to the male hair, that was we received the mitochondrial DNA profile. With regard to that, the nuclear DNA profile on that was 1.48 times 10 to the 169th power, as to come from someone sharing the same genetic profile as the defendant. And finally, with regard to Amber Costello, we received the nuclear DNA profile on that, and that was 4.654 times 10 to the 63rd power, as likely to have come from someone with the same genetic profile as his daughter, Victoria Heuermann. So again, the mitochondrial DNA for mother and daughter are going to be the same. Nuclear are going to be separate. Everyone has a separate nuclear DNA profile except for identical twins. We believe these DNA results are significant. Nuclear DNA, as illustrated, is much more discriminate, and the SNP technology that was utilized allows you to get nuclear DNA results from hair. This is, cutting edge. We talked earlier, and the questions were asked with regard to mitochondrial DNA, and is mitochondrial DNA analysis cutting edge? Not really. It's been around since 1996. It's been, used in courts in the United States since about 1996, I think. This SNP process is cutting edge. There are a couple of cases around the country where it's being used, but no finished cases, I believe. But it is scientifically accepted in both the medical and forensic community. It's used in the familial DNA context, so the science is certainly extremely solid. And the good thing about it is it's allowed us to differentiate between those Victoria Heuermann and Asa Ellerup hairs. So that's important. So that's basically the bail letter. I'll open it up to questions, but I just want to end with, we said at the very beginning that we were going to take a comprehensive look at the Gilgo Four cases. I think we've done that. We've completed that. We used the grand jury process. Now we move to the second phase. The second phase being the prosecution of these 4 cases, as well as continuing to use the grand jury to investigate the other cases, the other bodies, and the other murders, which we think are investigatively significant. And we're certainly going to do that. We're going to use the same methodology. We're going to use the grand jury, and if we come to a result in the time, and when the time is appropriate, we'll have further comment on that.
So thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.